All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive. You ready to get into some really interesting stuff today?
hmm
We're going to be talking about leadership. I know it's something we talk about a lot, but today we're going to be looking at this book called Leaders Eat Last. And it's a pretty fascinating take on the whole concept of leadership.
Right.
It actually uses a bunch of different examples and stuff like from the Marine Corps and hunter-gatherer tribes, and even goes into brain chemistry.
It's fascinating how he ties all these things together.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't necessarily think that those things would be related, but he does a really good job of connecting those worlds and revealing something really fundamental about what it means to be human and
Yeah.
what it means to be a leader.
It's so interesting, too, because, he starts out with this story about a Marine Corps general in a combat zone.
hmm
And everyone is, exhausted, and they're hungry, they're ready to eat. And this general, instead of, grabbing a plate and digging in, he insists that, the youngest Marines get served first.
Right.
And he waits, with the other officers
Yeah.
until the very last private
Yeah.
is eating.
Yeah, it's not just a feel-good story.
Yeah.
It's actually illustrating one of the core principles of the book,
Right.
which is that leaders eat last.
Okay.
And this idea that you prioritize the well-being of the team over your own personal gain, which
Well-
is something that he argues is actually deeply rooted in our biology.
Okay, so we're talking leadership,
hmm
but also ancient survival instincts. That seems like a little bit of a stretch.
Yeah.
How do those two connect?
Well, think about hunter-gatherer times,
Okay.
right? So our ancestors lived in a world that was full of threats, like
Mhm.
predators, other tribes,
Right.
harsh environments, all kinds of things. And the only way to survive was to belong to a tightly knit and trustworthy group.
So basically, if you were a lone wolf, you were in big trouble.
Yeah, you were toast.
Yeah.
And that need to belong and that need to feel safety within the group was literally life or death.
Wow.
And so Sinek argues that that primal instinct is still wired into us today.
So even though I'm not worried about saber-toothed tigers at the office,
Right.
my brain still wants that same feeling of safety.
Exactly. And he calls it the circle of safety.
Okay.
It's something that we seek in every aspect of our lives, really, like work relationships,
Yeah.
our communities.
Right.
And he says that the people who truly understand this deep human need,
Yeah.
those are the people that can create those circles of safety for others.
I see. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
But what are the dangers that we're facing in a modern workplace? Because obviously it's not like my boss is going to throw me to the lions if I miss a deadline or something.
Right. They're not
But
as
sadly,
physically dangerous,
yeah.
but they can trigger that same kind of primal fear response.
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
think about the constant pressure to perform,
Yeah.
fear of layoffs, office politics, having a boss who takes all the credit for your work.
Oh, yeah.
All of those things can really create an environment where people just feel constantly on edge.
Oh, yeah. You're walking on eggshells all the time.
Ex-
You're second-guessing every decision.
Yeah.
Afraid to speak up.
Right.
Constantly worried about making a mistake.
And that's when the trouble really starts.
Okay.
Because that chronic stress, that feeling of being unsafe,
Yeah.
it doesn't just impact our mood.
Uh,
It literally changes our brain chemistry.
Wait, so my anxiety about that presentation I have to give next week isn't just me being a worrywart. It's actually messing with my brain.
Well, when we're in that state of fear, our bodies release cortisol,
Oh, yeah.
which is the stress hormone.
Right, right.
And a little cortisol can be helpful, in short bursts.
Okay.
But when we're exposed to it for too long,
Yeah.
it can lead to a lot of negative effects.
What? Give me the scary details.
So think about burnout,
Yeah.
decreased productivity, difficulty concentrating,
No.
impaired decision-making.
Thanks.
And then even on a team level, it can stifle creativity and innovation
Right.
because people become risk-averse.
Oh, that makes sense.
They're afraid to speak up or challenge the status quo because they're so busy trying to protect themselves
Right.
that they're not really focused on the bigger picture.
Oh, wow. So if you're a leader who leads through fear, you're not just creating a bad work environment. You're actually actively making your team less effective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He argues that it's not only detrimental to individual well-being, but it also sabotages a team's potential.
Right.
It creates this culture of self-preservation
Mm-hmm.
where people are more concerned with avoiding blame than they are with achieving shared goals.
That makes sense.
Huh.
So how do we break out of that? If fear is such a primal instinct, can we actually rewire our brains to feel safe, especially at work?
That's where things get really interesting. He actually talks about the science of trust.
Oh,
and the role of hormones, particularly
they
oxytocin.
love hormones at work.
Yeah, it's not as romantic as it sounds.
Right.
Oxytocin is released when we feel safe and connected to others,
Okay.
and it actually promotes collaboration, generosity, and even risk-taking.
So if leaders can figure out how to like trigger this oxytocin response, they can basically create a team of like super collaborators.
Well, it's not that simple, but the research is pretty compelling.
Yeah.
When leaders prioritize building trust and creating that sense of belonging, they are literally setting the stage for a more positive and productive work environment
On a biological level.
on a biological level.
That's incredible. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of like fascinating stuff here, but how do we actually put this into practice? Like, what does this actually look like in a real workplace?
That's where it gets really interesting because he offers a lot of practical advice in the book.
Okay.
And it all starts with like understanding the true meaning of leadership.
All right, well, let's dive into those strategies and see if we can figure out how to build those circles of safety in the real world.
Sounds good.
All right, so we've talked about this idea of building a circle of safety and how important that is for leadership.
Mhm.
But I'm guessing most of us aren't leading troops into battle or anything like that.
Yeah.
So how do we translate these like Marine Corps principles into something that's relevant for, the average person, the average workplace?
Well, that's the beauty of his work. It's surprisingly applicable to like pretty much any environment where you have humans interacting.
Right.
And it doesn't require you to be a CEO or make these grand gestures,
Yeah.
you know?
Right.
It's often about these small, consistent actions that demonstrate genuine care for your team.
Okay. So less about like barking orders and more about
Yeah.
like actually giving a damn about the people you work with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the most fundamental things that leaders can do is to be truly present and available for their team. And I don't just mean like physically present, but like mentally present.
Right.
Actively listening to their concerns, acknowledging their efforts, offering support when they need it,
Yeah.
creating a space where people feel comfortable speaking up, sharing ideas,
Right.
even admitting mistakes without the fear of being judged or punished.
That sounds so simple.
Yeah.
But in reality, it feels like so many workplaces are all about saving face and not showing weakness.
Yeah, that's where the concept of vulnerability comes in.
So,
He argues that leaders who are willing to show their own imperfections, admit when they don't have all the answers, actually build stronger connections with their team.
really, that's so counterintuitive because we're always told that as a leader, you have to project confidence, you got to have all the answers. Isn't showing vulnerability seen as a sign of weakness?
That's that old school command and control mentality.
Yeah.
In reality, though, people can sense when someone is being inauthentic.
Right.
So when a leader is willing to be vulnerable, it actually signals to the team that, hey, it's okay to be human.
Yeah.
It's okay to make mistakes.
Yeah.
It's okay to not have all the answers.
Right.
We can learn and grow together.
It's about building trust, not just through your words, but through your actions that show that you're human too.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And trust is the bedrock of a circle of safety. And that's something that needs to be earned over time.
Right.
Think back to that Marine general eating last. He wasn't just being polite. He was demonstrating through his actions that the well-being of his Marines was his top priority.
Yeah, it's like he was saying, I trust you enough to put my own needs aside,
Exactly.
which is a really powerful message.
It is. And it goes beyond just individual actions.
Okay.
He also talks about the importance of setting clear expectations and boundaries.
Wait, boundaries. I thought this was all about creating like a warm and fuzzy environment where everyone feels like safe and loved and
Well, it's about both.
okay.
Having clear rules and guidelines actually reduces anxiety and stress.
Oh, okay.
Because when people know what's expected of them,
Yeah.
they can feel more confident and secure in their roles.
It's like if you're going on like a challenging hike
Okay.
and you have a map,
Yeah,
you might not know exactly what you're going to encounter along the way,
right.
but just knowing the general direction.
Yeah.
And having some landmarks makes the journey a lot less daunting.
Exactly. So in a workplace, that translates to things like well-defined job descriptions,
Right.
clear communication channels,
Yeah.
regular feedback.
Right.
It's about removing ambiguity and creating a sense of order,
Yep.
which allows people to actually focus on doing their best work.
So it's not about micromanaging or like being overly controlling.
Right.
It's about providing that structure and that clarity so people can do their best work.
Precisely. And that structure also helps prevent misunderstandings and conflicts,
Right.
which can really erode trust
Yeah.
and damage the relationships within the team.
Okay, so we've talked about being present, being vulnerable, setting clear expectations. What else can leaders do to foster this sense of safety and belonging? What are some other tangible actions that they can take?
Well, another thing that he emphasizes is the importance of recognizing and celebrating individual contributions.
Okay.
And this doesn't have to be a grand gesture. It could be as simple as a sincere thank you
Right.
or like publicly acknowledging a job well done.
You mean like actually telling people they did a good job instead of just assuming they know?
Sounds basic, but you'd be surprised how many leaders overlook this.
Yeah.
When people feel genuinely appreciated, it reinforces their sense of belonging
Right.
and it motivates them to contribute even more.
It's like you're valued for your unique skills and your efforts.
Exactly. And it creates this ripple effect too.
Right.
Because when people see their colleagues being recognized and appreciated, it encourages them to do the same for others.
Right.
So it fosters a culture of positive reinforcement.
So it's not just about the leader being the cheerleader. It's about encouraging everybody to kind of celebrate each other's wins.
That's the idea.
Okay.
And along those lines, another really powerful way to build a circle of safety is to encourage collaboration and teamwork.
Instead of that, like, every person for themselves mentality that you see in certain industries.
Exactly. He argues that when people feel like they're part of a team, working towards a shared goal, they're more likely to be generous with their time and knowledge.
Right.
To help each other out and to celebrate each other's successes.
It's like that saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
I love that quote, and it really encapsulates the power of collaboration.
Yeah.
When people work together toward a common goal with a shared sense of purpose, they can achieve extraordinary things.
Yeah. So this is all starting to paint a really compelling picture of what a healthy work environment could look like. But creating this circle of safety, it sounds like an ongoing process. It's not like a one-time fix.
You're absolutely right. It requires consistent attention and effort from everyone on the team,
Right.
from the leader to the newest member.
Yeah.
It's about making choices and taking actions that reinforce that sense of belonging over time.
So you can't just have like a team building retreat and call it a day. You really have to weave these principles into how you work together day in and day out.
Exactly. And it's important to acknowledge that there will be setbacks and challenges along the way. Oh, of course.
Mistakes will be made, conflicts will arise,
Right.
but a true leader will use those moments as opportunities to learn, build resilience, to foster empathy, and to strengthen those bonds within the team.
So it's not about pretending everything is perfect. It's about facing those challenges head on and using them to become even stronger as a team.
Precisely. Remember, creating a circle of safety isn't just about making people feel good, although that's a nice bonus.
Right.
It's really about creating an environment where they can do their best work.
So it's good for morale and productivity. That's awesome.
Exactly. When people feel safe, supported, and valued, they're more likely to be engaged, productive, and innovative. It's not rocket science, but it's amazing how many companies miss this fundamental truth.
All this talk about creating amazing workplaces makes me wonder, are there any real-world examples of companies that are actually getting this right? Like who's walking the walk when it comes to leaders eat last?
That's a great question, and he actually profiles several companies in the book.
That have successfully implemented these principles, even in industries that are traditionally known for being really tough and demanding.
Okay, I'm hooked. Let's dive into those examples and see how this circle of safety idea is playing out in the real world.
Oh.
Okay, so are there actually companies out there that are embracing this whole circle of safety thing? Or is this just like wishful thinking?
Well, he doesn't just preach this philosophy. He actually backs it up with real-world examples of companies that are thriving by putting their people first.
Okay, cool.
And some of them might surprise you.
Okay, lay it on me. Who is leading the pack when it comes to building a circle of safety?
Well, one of the most compelling examples is Maersk.
Maersk.
Yeah, the global container shipping giant.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't think of cargo ships and logistics as being like a breeding ground for warm and fuzzy feelings.
Right. But they've created this remarkably strong culture of safety and trust.
Okay, but how do you create that feeling of belonging when you're dealing with, giant metal boxes?
Yeah. Well, it all starts with the leadership.
Yeah.
Instead of ruling by fear, Maersk's leaders actually prioritize their employees' well-being,
Right.
even in a really high-stakes industry.
Right.
They actually implemented this policy where any employee, regardless of their rank, could halt operations if they felt like safety was being compromised.
Wow, that's a really bold move to hand that much power to every employee. Did that cause chaos?
No, quite the opposite.
Really?
This radical trust in their employees actually led to a 50% reduction in accidents.
Wow.
Because by empowering their people to speak up,
Right.
they created a culture where everybody felt responsible for safety,
That makes sense.
which led to better outcomes for everyone.
So this circle of safety idea, it's not just about like feeling good. It can actually lead to like tangible results.
Exactly. Maersk's commitment to their people translates into greater efficiency, fewer costly mistakes, and ultimately a more profitable business.
Okay.
And their employees are happier and more engaged. It's proof that prioritizing people isn't just ethical, it's actually really smart business.
Yeah, totally.
Mm.
Okay, so do you have any other examples of companies who are like killing it with this approach?
Another great example is Southwest Airlines.
Oh, yeah.
They're legendary for their positive work environment
Right.
and their exceptional customer service.
Right.
And it all stems from their commitment to creating that circle of safety for their employees.
Right. Southwest, where like the flight attendants tell jokes and everyone seems like genuinely happy to be there.
Yeah.
But isn't that like famously casual culture also kind of a risk? Like, how do you balance safety with letting employees kind of be quirky?
Well, it's not about being lax on safety.
Okay.
It's about trusting your employees to use their best judgment within a clear set of values.
Right.
So Southwest really focuses on hiring people who are naturally helpful and service-oriented,
Okay.
and then they empower them to make decisions that put the customer first.
So instead of having like a rule for every possible situation, they just hire people that they trust to do the right thing.
Exactly. And it's been a wildly successful approach.
I mean, they're doing something right.
Yeah, they consistently rank high in customer satisfaction and employee retention,
Yeah, that's true.
which proves that a happy workforce translates to happy customers and a healthy bottom line.
So it's not about choosing between profits and people.
Right.
It's about recognizing that those things are actually linked.
Yeah, if you take care of your employees, they'll take care of your business.
Right. Totally makes sense. So these companies are basically demonstrating that building a circle of safety isn't just some fluffy feel-good idea.
Right.
It's a real leadership principle that can totally transform an organization.
It is.
Wow. So for those of us who aren't CEOs, what can we do to bring some of this Leaders Eat Last magic into our own work lives?
Well, that's the really exciting part. You don't need a fancy title to embody these principles.
Okay.
Leadership is about influence, not authority.
Okay, so even if I'm not the one calling the shots, I can still like contribute to building a more positive and supportive environment.
Absolutely. Think about the places where you do feel that sense of safety and belonging.
Yeah.
Maybe it's your family,
Okay.
your close friends, a
Yeah.
team you've been a part of.
Right.
What makes those environments different?
Yeah, now that you mention it, there was this one team I was on where we were all super supportive of each other. We celebrated each other's wins.
Right.
And even when things got tough, we knew that we had each other's backs.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah.
So think about the small things
Yeah.
that contributed to that feeling of trust and connection. Maybe it was as simple as like checking in on each other,
Right.
offering to help, or just being a good listener.
Yeah, you're right. It wasn't about like these grand gestures.
Right.
It was those everyday things that really made a difference.
Exactly. And that's something that each of us can do regardless of our role or title.
Right.
So start by actively listening to your colleagues,
Okay.
offering help when you can, and acknowledging their efforts.
Yeah.
Be a voice for positive change, even if it's just within your immediate sphere of influence.
I love that.
Yeah.
So we don't have to wait for someone else to create that circle of safety.
Right.
We can actually start building it ourselves right where we are.
Exactly. And who knows, those small acts of courage and kindness might inspire other people to do the same.
Right.
And it creates that ripple effect that extends far beyond just your immediate circle.
I love it. So what's like the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this deep dive into Leaders Eat Last?
You know, the world can feel pretty chaotic and uncertain right now.
Yeah, for sure.
But we each have the power to create pockets of safety and belonging.
Right.
Starting with our own choices and our own actions. You don't need a fancy title or a corner office to be a leader.
Right. It's about choosing to eat last, to prioritize the well-being of the people around us, and to trust that in doing so, we create a better environment for everyone.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Remember, leadership isn't about power, it's about responsibility. The responsibility to create a world where people feel safe, supported, and inspired to do their best work.
I love that. This has been a great conversation. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive into Leaders Eat Last. We hope you learned something new, and more importantly, that you're inspired to go out and create a little more safety and belonging in your own corner of the world. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.
So good.